The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today, taking time out of your schedule to be with us. I'm Allison Harrell. I'll be helping host today's webinar. I'm the Arborologist for Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements based out of Chicago, Illinois. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Matt Karst, who is moderating. He's helping out with the technology and the questions at the end, which I'll review in just a second. Our commitment to you all during these unprecedented times. We know you guys have been making adjustments to your organizations, and I just want to quickly say that it is our commitment to continue to support you with plant healthcare, science, and education to help you continue to grow despite what's going on. Quickly want to highlight that this is part one of a training series, so please join us for part two. This will happen on May 28th. That's with myself and Chris Haugen, also of Rainbow. We will be going over the live Macroinfusion training out in the field. So we'll review helpful tips and tricks to improve your uptake time, go through how to get effective and predictable results for your clients' elms, and just go through all of the field training side of things, and we'll leave it as an open forum for you guys to answer live questions. So quickly, housekeeping. We always start all of our meetings with a safety assessment. So I know we are all probably at our homes or offices, but please do a safety assessment for your surroundings, check for any trips or hazards. It's beautiful here in Chicago right now, but I know we've got folks from all over the country. So if there is inclement weather or an emergency, please identify your course of action. This will be recorded and sent out, so take care of yourself first. And then with the Q&A process, you'll see on your screen, there's a little box where it says enter question for the staff. Please enter your questions there, and then we will queue them up for the end. And the CEU process, I think we will automatically get CEUs for this. You will get an email after the webinar. There's nothing that you need to do for that though. And then it is my honor to introduce today's speaker. This is Tom Prosser, Rainbow's founder and CEO. Just a brief background, as the story goes, in 1976, Tom noticed a lot of elms in his neighborhood dying and wondered if there was something that could be done about it. So he began testing different chemicals out there and offering elm protection services to his parents' friends, many who resided on Rainbow Lane in Minnetonka, Minnesota, where we are headquartered. So that is where the name of our company comes from. And that was when Rainbow Elm Care was born. So he and his friends continued to research every different product on the market, but were finally able to get predictable results with Arborist. So that's what we're going to learn about a little bit today. It actually got to the point where Rainbow was using and selling over 65% of the total of all of Arborist. So we were really the movers and shakers with this product and getting good scientific results with this protocol. So from there, we grew into a full service plant healthcare and tree care company based out of the Twin Cities. And then eventually Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements was born. That happened in the 90s. And our goal is aimed at bringing research-backed technologies to create predictable results through our products, our equipment, and our protocols. Tom has more experience with elm treatments than probably any other arborist out there. From the days when he started in the field to being a consulting arborist to being an arborologist like myself, and now to the point where he's running the business side of things. He has been in charge of setting up many successful elm programs. This includes the Evanston, Illinois program, and he also serves as a consultant for the almost 3,000 elms at the National Mall and at the White House. So with that, let's get started. We'll send this over to you, Tom.
Sure. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's really, thank you very much, and for everyone coming, it's really a privilege to be able to come back and do this. This is definitely one of my favorite topics, and I think that we can really help you guys save elm trees. and set up great programs. So this program is really about giving you key distinctions about the elm tree and about this disease and about the beetle that transmits this disease, so that you can have common sense when you are dealing with this disease in terms of what to do. So we're going to cover all of that so that you will have that, and you will have that to apply to whatever situation you find yourself in. Also, this training today includes everything except the actual macroinfusion and the details of that, and how to get fast uptake and how to get even and complete distribution. So we have had really tremendous success with this program after we got it figured out and what we were doing. What you're looking at in this slide are elm trees that we started protecting in 1981 and have been treating every 3 years since then. I believe that they lost 2 trees on this block in a windstorm, but other than that, none to Dutch Elm Disease. We have numerous golf courses that we have a virtual 98% save rate since the early 80s. And I know this also process is used across the country at a lot of places. One of our big success stories is Evanston, Illinois. And I believe there might be people from Evanston, Illinois here. I know they're continuing with their program. But when I showed up in Evanston and was working with a citizens group there, they were losing massive number of trees, between 600 and 800 elms in 01, 02, and 03. And after we implemented these protocols I'm about to show you, they lost approximately 20 total elms over the next 10 years. And as staff changed and so forth, they had some greater losses in recent years, but we're going to be going back in and revising that program and making sure that we can get the losses down to what they used to be. So what is Dutch Elm Disease? So first of all, an important fact to know about Dutch Elm Disease is that it can spread fast. And it did spread fast when it was sweeping the country. Whole populations of elms can easily be lost in a 3 to 4 year period if it is not managed. And here's a situation in Minneapolis back in probably the 80s, where you can see all these elms, and every single one of them except one of them is infected. So this is one of the first distinctions. And like I said, I want to give you distinctions. I want to give you like key facts so that you can put this together. But so Dutch elm disease is a fungus. It's a fungus that's highly aggressive in elms, and it only grows in elms. It doesn't grow in any other tree, and it's in the same family as bread mold. It's called Ascomyces. When managing Dutch elm disease, there have been numerous methods of doing so. You know, as most of you know who know a little bit about this, we'll be talking about a beetle in a minute. But the way you manage this disease is not to manage the beetle, it's to manage the fungus. It's primarily spread from tree to tree by the elm bark beetle. And this elm bark beetle feeds in the 2 to 4 year old branches up in the top of the tree. It feeds on the wood, it mates, and lives a good part of its life up in a little den it makes up in the tree. If this beetle happens to be carrying the fungus will rub off its body and start to aggressively grow into the tree. Now these beetles, their whole life cycle revolves around elm trees. They breed in dying elm trees, and they feed on the living elm trees. And if the tree that they breed in died from Dutch elm disease, which most elms out there that are dying or died do, these beetles will be carrying the fungus. Now, sometimes they might be in a big dead branch on the top of the tree, and that branch was not Dutch elm caused. In that case, those beetles are harmless to the tree. It's really just the beetles coming from the diseased wood. That's why we say the goal and the key to this, managing this disease, is to manage the fungus on a citywide or a large elm group population. So talk about symptoms. So symptoms of this disease, as the fungus starts to grow in the vascular tissue, start to appear on the outside. And what's important to understand is that the symptoms don't often reflect how far the disease has grown in the tree. So you can have a tree that looks like it's about 5% infected, and the fungus can have grown all the way to the ground. Another key point that you really need to understand if you look at a lot of elm trees or you're doing scouting is a lot of times you'll see flat elm leaves up in the crown of the tree, especially in July and August as the heat comes on. That's most of the time, I'm not going to say every time, but vastly majority of the time is not Dutch elm disease, especially if they're shiny. Dutch elm disease symptoms are characterized by curled and droopy leaves. And you will see a progression down the tree that really follows how the fungus grows in the tree. So we're going to talk about that next. So trees are highly compartmentalized. And this determines how the fungus can grow. So, typically the fungus will be in a very narrow streak going down the branch, into the trunk, and down the trunk. And you can see in this here, in the middle here, this dark material, you can see it right here too. And that fungus grows down and it hits the roots. Well, there's very few symptoms in a tree as it's growing down, but you can see them if you're looking. But once it hits the roots, the tree becomes systemically infected. And at that point, the tree is not savable, and you're going to have to implement other factors here to manage the trees that might be surrounding it. But you can see how the fungus hit the roots and then went up and started growing throughout the tree. At that point, you see a lot of leaves wilting. Okay, so where in the tree does the fungus grow? Elms are somewhat unique now in that the only tissue that transports water is the current year xylem. Every year in the fall, the elm tree will retire last year's xylem, and it will fill it with tyloses, and then in the spring it will put out a new xylem. So the fungus can only grow where there is no tyloses, so it only grows in the current year xylem. One of the ways that you can tell how long a tree has been infected, do a crosscut, and you can see that in this case the fungus was in last year's wood. So you knew it was infected last year. And then you can see it probably grew down the tree, and now this is the systemic fungus growing up the tree. There's a characteristic brown staining that accompanies this disease. And it's important to know that the fungus itself is not brown. The brown coloration is literally caused by the tree's reaction to the fungus, and it's what's called a tylose response. And it's the tree's effort to try and compartmentalize and block that disease. Unfortunately, it's not fast enough, and the fungus is fairly aggressive and grows fairly quick ahead of this in most cases. Okay, so that's some of the key distinctions about individual trees and how the fungus works and how the beetles work, and etc. So now let's talk about practices that you need if you're managing a population of elms. So there's really 5 practices that you need to follow when managing a larger population. I know there's some cities on here on this, and there's some organizations that have multiple elms. So this is really for you, as well as for the rest of you, if you're going to do some consulting and helping with this situation. As you can see, this is a before and after picture. I believe it's from the 70s, and it's somewhere in Illinois. So the first step in managing this disease is to scout. And you want to be looking at your trees during the growing season to really understand where the disease is and to try and find it early. We're going to, as you saw, the 5th step or one of the steps of this was to be able to save some of these trees. And so the scouting will get you ahead of it. Also, because this disease can spread so rapidly, you really want to be on top of it. We typically, for example, on a golf course that we would manage, we would inspect the trees once a month, and then we would also go in a perimeter about half a mile to a mile to see if there's any disease trees there, because what we're really trying to do is reduce the pressure of disease-carrying beetles. And so we would go and we'd look for stumps, and then look for wood piles, and we'd look for dying elms, and we'd notify the city. And then the third step here we'll talk about later. So the first step, and probably the most important step, is to get rid of the disease wood where the beetles will breed and then carry the disease to other trees. If you do that on a citywide basis, you can reduce your elm losses fairly significantly. I call this slide the tale of two cities. On the left, you have the city of St. Paul, and on the right, you have the city of Minneapolis. The city of St. Paul didn't react very fast to this disease, and a lot of trees caught it. In fact, I think it arrived there first, and so it spread extremely fast. And they were not very aggressive, and the city of St. Paul has about 1% of their original elm population left. The city of Minneapolis, on the other hand, was a model city, and I think actually was written up in National Geographic as a model city for Dutch Elm Disease probably about 20 years ago. And they were super aggressive. You can see they've already got these trees marked, and they've already got them topped out, and look at all the foliage. I probably could have saved most of those trees in this if I would have gotten there sooner. But as a result, Minneapolis still has many large elm trees. They're still losing them because they're not protecting them, but there's, because of their aggressiveness, they didn't have to take out as many trees as fast. It's very, very important, because one elm tree can have thousands of disease-carrying beetles, and they all emerge carrying the fungus, looking for another elm tree to feed on and mate and kind of live in. So this is why this disease can spread so tremendously fast and be out of control very quickly. Another aspect of managing this is a concept called root grafts. And most of you who are arborists here know what a root graft is. But for those that don't, a root graft is what happens when two trees of the same species and variety are growing near each other. Their roots fuse underground. And I know there's some really interesting books out there about how trees interact with each other, and that is all happens through root graft. Unfortunately, with Dutch elm disease, the fungus can grow down the tree into the roots and through the root graft into the neighboring tree. And this has to be dealt with. Otherwise, you will lose tree after tree after tree, which are actually quite easy to save. This is if you see the disease in a tree and it's in the ground, oftentimes you can get a root graft in and save the remaining elms there. So it's key. The other thing is that we're going to talk about protection with dibendazole, and that process will not work if the disease comes in from a root graft. So root grafts are an important piece to the puzzle that you have to take into consideration when managing these trees. So how do you sever root grafts? We've come up with a couple ways. One, you can use a trencher. And if you have an open area where there's no utilities or nothing underground, you just trench it and be done. There used to be a material called Vapam that was a soil fumigant that actually had some success, but it's no longer on the market. It's very toxic. The other way you can sever root grafts where there's near utilities is using an air spade or an air knife. And you're basically using that to remove the dirt, and then you're using a saw, hatchet, or whatever you can to cut the root grafts. Typically, you're not going to have root grafts in clay soil any deeper than 3 feet. Most root grafts take place in the top 1 foot, but if you have sandy soil, it can be quite a bit deeper, just because it has to do with the amount of oxygen in the soil in terms of how deep these roots grow. Now, a couple distinctions about trees growing in the city here. Root grass, unless it's a country road that's old and it's narrow, I've never seen a root graft under a street. You've usually got sewer going under there, and it's just too large of a span for those roots to grow. However, sidewalks definitely do not disrupt root graft, and these roots are growing under the sidewalks. So I'm going to give you a little bit of here's a little bit of a management tool. You know, if you're dealing with a tree, and let's say this is the diseased elm tree right here, what you do is you basically use geometry. You figure that the roots are going out in a fan, and you want to cut all of them. So you have to make different cuts in different places, and you just got to use your common sense to look at it. And we also recommend that you put in secondary trenches, just in case when trees are this close that the disease has already passed through. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to save a diseased elm. This is a concept that we first started doing in 1989. After doing a program with Alex Shigo, we came up with this as we were dissecting trees and realizing how elms grew and how the fungus grew and so forth. But we really realized to understand how to do this and get common sense about how to do this, you got to understand there's 5 distinctions about this. So the first distinction is that injection alone does not work. I have personally tried every kind of injection. I've used thiabendazole, I've used propiconazole, I used them both. I've done Arborist, 3 years in a row. And in every case, I've made the symptoms go away, but the tree has eventually died within a few years. And there's a reason for this. When the fungus is growing in the tree, those tyloses we talked about earlier form, that literally blocks the water uptake. And so where this disease is coming down, you've got water uptake blocks. So you could put a chemical in the tree, like propiconazole, but it's not going to be taken up into that column. And thus the fungus will grow all the way to the roots. What we have found when we inject with propiconazole, typically it'll block the symptoms from going systemic for the current year, and then the next year the tree will be systemic. With thiabendazole, which has a much longer half-life, what we have found is that you can literally make the tree asymptomatic for at least 2 years, and then what will happen is the tree will look like it kind of is fading out, like slowly turning off a light bulb. It'll get thinner and thinner, and then when you cut into it, you see that there's a lot of disease in there, but there's also a lot of open tissue, but that the fungus has moved virtually throughout the tree. So there are stories out there about saving trees with injection alone, but we've never done it. So if you have some evidence of that, I would love to hear about it. At the end of this will be my email. So the only way that you're going to save a diseased elm is by physically isolating the fungus. And since we know how the fungus grows in the tree, we can follow it. All right, the other key distinction, which we talked a little bit about already, is that the fungus only grows in the current year xylem. So it's not deep in the tree, and you can easily cut into the tree, not very deep, and block it from moving sideways. Also, that the brown discoloration in the tree is the tree's reaction to the fungus. And what we have found is that the fungus we've never seen the fungus more than 10 feet ahead of the stain. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's important to understand in doing this process. So here's a picture of a tree that we attempted to save. And I use this one because, sometimes you'll see just a very small symptom at the top, and you'll start to trace it, and it goes all the way to the ground, as this one does. Now this happens to be a wet spring, and so we've for many years we saved, we would attempt to save probably 50 to 100 elm trees. And what we found that if you had a dry spring, that fungus grew a lot slower, the xylem was a lot smaller, and it just didn't go as fast. And we we could save 90% of the trees if they had just a small amount of disease at the top. However, if it was a wet spring and the xylons were large and there was a lot of water, the same symptoms in the leaves we would tap into, and virtually most, if not all, of the trees would already be in the ground. So that is a factor with how the spring is in terms of saving trees. Again, the disease grows down the tree in a narrow band, and once it gets into the roots and goes systemic, there's no saving it. We've tried a number of things to try and save those. We haven't found anything. All right, another key distinction. How is a branch attached to the tree? This is a diagram that comes from Alex Shigo book. But as you can see, branches are mostly not directly attached to a tree. There's a thing called a collar that grows, every year, and it's extremely strong attachment. But in terms of the vascular tissue of a branch is only attached at the bottom. And why is this important? Because when you're trying to find the fungus in the tree, you can go to the base of the branch where you see it, and on the downward side, and you will find it there. Even if it's growing down the top of the branch, it'll grow straight down. It does not grow up. And so we call this process tracing. And again, the process includes finding it in the tree and then compartmentalizing this fungus by making cuts down the tree. You don't have to go deep. Here's an example of a tree we saved. It was in this branch. You can see, sure enough, the fungus was right where we thought it would be, and it was growing partly way down the trunk. What we did is we cut an additional 10 feet down and then did a cross cut at the bottom. This way, you have the disease surrounded on all sides with the chainsaw cut, and then you can treat the tree. And so I'll show you a picture of that tree later. It's still alive. I think that trace was in the 90s. Again, tracing will not work if the disease is within 10 feet of the roots. If it's about 10 feet, you can try. But if it's 5 feet, it's just not going to work. And so you always want to make sure that if this is the case and there's surrounding elms, that you install one of your trenches. Here's an example of a tree that was treated. Here's 2 years after tracing. You can see the fungus above the burrow. It went into the burrow and started to come out. Here's that same tree 6 years later. You can see they did more landscaping and so forth. Here's that tree we just looked at before, right after. Here's that same tree 6 years later. Now, I just want to say that those cross cuts that you see, that's operator error. That's unnecessary wounding. So be careful when you're out doing it. And then here's the first ever trace tree in 1989. This was a gigantic elm tree behind a house in Minneapolis that I think back in 1989, it was like $3 grand to remove it. It'd be probably 10 grand today. And we were able to save this tree. I believe we still treat it. All right, so the last step of the management program is protecting healthy and valuable elms with thibendazole. And really the key distinction with macroinfusion is that your purpose in doing this process is to evenly and completely cover the whole crown and all of the 2 to 4 year old branches in the tree with enough material so that wherever the beetle feeds, the disease cannot take hold and grow in that tree. Now, we've done a lot of research, and we've had a lot of trees, large trees available to us through the Department of Transportation. And so we've tested most things that have come out in the market. And what this research involved was treating 10 trees the same, and then going into those 10 trees and injecting the fungus into the tree as if we were a beetle feeding on the tree. So we do that in 30 different spots. Actually, we did it in 10 spots 3 times during the course of the year, spring, summer, fall, or, it was all during the growing season. And in this particular study, we tested 4 compounds. 2 of them had no effectiveness, and the 2 that did have effectiveness was dibenzol and propiconazole. And what we found with propiconazole was that it worked really good for 1 year. We had 0 of our infection points take hold, compared to the controls, which were 100%. And but however, when we came back the second year, there was no protection in those trees, so they died as if they were untreated, which makes sense since propiconazole has a half-life of about 60 days, and so it breaks down in the tree. In fact, there's a study now that's online that you can get from the University of Virginia out of Blackborough or something, but where they tested propiconazole, and they could only find propiconazole in the tree 8 months later, and after that they couldn't find it. Now Arbortec's a little different. Dibendazole has a half-life of over 400 days, and so it's highly persistent. It's also viscous, and so it moves into new wood. And what we found was that when we injected these trees with dibendazole or Arbortec, we had 100% crown coverage of these trees for the first 2 years. And then in the 3rd year, it waned a little. And we found that we had about 85% crown coverage of the fungicide at the points where we treated. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, sorry, I just got distracted there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, I'll keep moving on. So, oh yeah, there's a thing that we do, how we manage our elm trees, because of that 85% crown coverage, and I'll explain that. So talk a little bit more about macroinfusion here. In order to get the even and complete coverage of the fungicide, injections must be made into the root flares. And this sometimes includes excavation. Now, root flares are naturally supposed to be above the ground. So, a lot of times if you're treating a tree and you're coming back, just leave it excavated and put some wood chips around it and explain to the client that the tree was unhealthily buried, because if your root flares are all below ground, then typically that is not good for the tree. So you don't want to inject into the trunk. Now, as we saw with how the fungus grows in a very, very narrow column, trunk tissue is very compartmentalized, and the cell walls are very hard and rigid. Thus, and this is elms, I'm not talking about ash, and I'm not talking about some other trees, but in elms, it's very hard and rigid. And so if you inject into the trunk, you're going to get very poor sideways movement of the product. The big advantages of going into the root flares is you have more surface area. So you might have 2 to 3 times the surface area, which gives you more space to put more injection sites in. Also, the root flare tissue shares. So you get 3 to 4 tons more sideways movement of the material when injecting into the root flares. And the other good factor of this is that there's the meristem in the root flares there's more of it. There's more cells. As you get up into the trunk, it's a thinner layer of cambium. When you get down into the root flares, it's a thicker layer, and so the wounds heal faster. Now, I have a misquote. They don't actually heal. They compartmentalize faster and they grow over faster. Trees don't heal. They compartmentalize. So, distribution is key. And when you use macroinfusion, a tree that's this big probably is going to take up about 50 gallons of solution. Now, you're going to learn when you go to the next seminar that you can do that in about 40 minutes in most trees. Under an hour, 95% of the time. And it's all a matter of the technique. So doing microinjections, not a good method. You don't have enough material with microinjection to fully cover the whole crown of the tree. And the other part of it is oftentimes the microinjectors recommend going into the trunk. So it's very poor coverage, and even if that product that they're talking about even works. So how do we deal with our trees in the third year? Because we know they have 85% crown coverage. What we do is we scout. We have about over 7,000 elms on our program. And so in around July 1st, we do printouts of every tree, and our consulting arborists make their way during the month of July and August and go visit every single tree, looking for flagging. And usually every year we find a few, but we catch them, and we're able to trace it out of the tree the vast majority of the time. If we're not, all our trees are guaranteed, and we give their money back. So it's that good that we can guarantee it. So rarely do we do treatments every 2 years. Now, if we did, you want to do 2 treatments in 5 years. So you do a treatment in the late season, and then you'd wait 2 years, and then you'd do it in the spring. But what we have found is if you inject elms with this material too often, you start to get problems in the roots after about 7 injections. So by keeping it on a 3-year cycle and using scouting, you're able to stretch the treatment protection an extra year. I know some people like to treat every 2. I really advise against that for the long term. You know, and so what happens is that by the end of the 3rd year, when you re-inject the tree, you're injecting into all brand new wood. You get no buildup of the wounds. So it's literally 50% longer by waiting that extra year, right? So that's pretty important. Okay, let's see what else. So here's just the steps of the Macroinfusion protocol, and that's going to be covered on 528. Won't go through that. And then there's some pitfalls. If you're treating trees, you need to understand these pitfalls, because almost for sure, if your uptake is less than an hour, no matter how much material, I mean, I put 100 gallons of material into a giant elm tree in about 30 minutes, using multiple sets of equipment, of course, but it goes in very quickly if you do it right. And really the key is a razor sharp drill bit, not cauterizing the xylem. The xylem, you're basically slicing it open, and you're placing this material right into the tree. So they'll cover that. Allison and Chris will cover that in detail. So that's what I have for you today, guys. Do we have any questions? Matt, Allison?
Hi.
Not
I don't
seeing
know
any questions coming over here. We can have Allison wrap this up and see if any come in while she's going through that part.
Okay.
So hang on. I'm just here to remind you that we are here for technical support. Oh, that is not the right screen. I apologize. Can you see this?
Yep.
So we have a full technical support line. You can call us, email us, text us, or live chat. We are here to offer help as far as diagnostics, product questions, and equipment troubleshooting and field support, in addition to any of our virtual or hands-on training. So our goal after this portion would be to have you guys sit in on the second part that we talked about at the beginning, the live field training with myself and Chris Haugen. And if you can't make that, we will send out a recording for that as well. But then in addition to that, a socially distant hands-on training, if applicable, if we can get to you, without violating any of our travel restrictions. So just wanted to make you aware of that in case you did not know. Those technical support That technical support is offered to anyone who's here.
All right, and then with that, we'll open it up to questions. Let's see, we had a few come in. Let's see, first question, when tracing, do you cut the entire perimeter of the fungus?
Well, you do, excuse me, the way, there is a whole tracing method and there's a paper on it that goes into great detail about it. But basically what you're doing is you're compartmentalizing the fungus away from the tree. So you'll see you find the fungus and you stay to the side of it and you cut down with the chainsaw and you pound the bark off to see it. And you go down and then if you're able to save the tree, you go back up and you cut a 1-inch cut that branch off, cut a 1-inch cut down each side outside the fungus, go past the fungus 10 feet, and there's a way to go past. There's a way to know what xylem tubes are past it, which I won't get into, but you can read about. And then you make a cross cut at the bottom so that the fungus is completely isolated from the tree.
All right, and next one, I think along the same lines, is what technique do you use to remove the bark and trace the tyloses?
What we do is use a chainsaw, usually a bucket truck, and you cut, into the tree, just past the bark, and then you take a hammer and you hit the bark, and the bark falls off. Just a regular metal hammer.
All right, and next question. Yeah, I think so. We'll see if we have any additional ones come in. Next one is, will this protect against elm yellows?
No. Elm yellows is a different organism called a phytoplasm. And not to my knowledge does it protect against it. I don't know. I have not heard. I remember that being a big problem back in the 80s and the 90s, especially down in the Illinois area and in the Midwest. We haven't really had a problem with elm yellows in Minnesota, so I have very little experience with it. But I would venture to say it probably doesn't, because it's a different kind of organism that causes that.
All right, and I think this is more of a technical support question. What is the best procedure on asking questions? Regional rep first, then arborologist, then helpline?
Whatever is available. I mean, I guess maybe you should answer that, Allison.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Technical support, we are available during normal business hours. So if you're, for some reason, are having trouble getting hold of your territory manager, that's a great way to get a quicker response. That being said, if you have a good relationship with either your territory manager or your arborologist, you can feel free to reach out to them directly. Doesn't really matter. Whatever is the easiest for you is fine.
All right, and next question is, where can the paper regarding tracing be found?
Ask your territory arborist or your arborologist. They should have access to it on their hard drive. There's also a video somewhere, not sure.
Okay, that seems to be it. We can hold out a little bit longer to see if any other questions.
I have one question.
Sure.
How do you set up the client expectation for potentially having to incur the cost of tracing for the tree in the 3rd year?
Okay, so in our case, what we do is our trees are guaranteed. So if it's disease-free and we treat it, we guarantee it for 3 seasons. Up until it's perpetually guaranteed if they go ahead with the treatment after 3 years. So if we see that a tree has the disease, it's our cost. So we don't charge the client for that, and we just take care of it. It's very small percent.
Got it. So then, do you include the cost? You include like an upcharge in knowing that you will have to do it on a certain percentage of trees? And granted, there's, you know, hundreds of trees in your program. Even if it was like $5 a tree, that would probably cover it. I'm just wondering from the business side.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did a long time ago. We added $5 to the cost and just kind of figured that was a pool. And we treat about 2,500 elms every year. So I think it more than covered it, but you know, and with our losses being so low, I mean, it's much lower than we ever expected, especially over the long run. Does that answer it?
Thank you. I'm just thinking for businesses that have a smaller volume of elm trees,
Yeah.
that will be a bit more challenging, but it is definitely interesting to get the take on how Rainbow handles it.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, the way we look at our business is that we're not looking to nickel and dime our clients. We feel that if they entrust the elms to us, we're going to take care of them and do it right. Vast majority of the time, we're not going to see problems. But if they do, we take care of it. And you know, if you have a client that's treating their elm trees and you're taking care of them like that, you'll make it up in other places. You know, the key is to, you know, have integrity with you know, saving the tree every way you can. I mean, you know, the way I look at it is they're not paying us to inject their tree. They're paying us to keep their tree preserved. So I'm charging them whatever it's gonna, you know, we charge them an injection rate, and that would include any of the other work we would need to do.
All right, we did have another question. I think this one's for Allison. What is the difference between an arborologist and an arborist?
That's a great question. An arborologist is really just a made-up word that Rainbow has created. I am a certified arborist. However, my main job is not a consulting arborist. It is to bring the science and technology to all of you who are arborists in the field. So they just added the ology part of things to make it a little bit more of a marrying of the science to the practical applications. But thank you for the question. It's not real.
Oh, it's real. You're very good at it.
Thanks, Tom.
You know, we came up with arborologists a number of years ago because we have our territory arborists who work with companies, but we really found that, you know, when we were hiring people, we found that good territory arborists weren't super duper scientific, but we wanted that to be a part of our program. And so we created this title called the Arborologist that we don't just give to anybody. You have to really prove that you have vast knowledge and are a real tree geek and know your stuff and, you know, have the degrees, etc., so that you can help educate and train and, you know, not only our staff internally, but all our clients. So an arborologist is a far advanced arborist, basically. And their job is to learn and educate. They're not necessarily working with your business, but they're working with the science. And they make sure that our protocols get predictable results. They do research. They work with our clients to do research. I think last year we did a couple hundred research projects all around the country, and a number of them were with clients trying to figure out different things. And in those cases, you'll have an arborologist involved. So it's real. It's a far more advanced arborist than a regular arborist.
All right, I think that does it for questions. Thank you both for that great presentation.
Yep, you're welcome. Hope that everyone got a lot out of it.
And thank you everyone for joining. And don't forget to register for any of the last few following webinars and the second part of this where we'll do the live demonstration. Thanks everybody and have a great day.
All right, thank you.